Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national broadcaster Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and how India is making the world a better place. Viewers, this is a special episode under the series of Bharat Reloaded, a commemoration being done by Doordarshan on completion of 12 years of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's momentous rule. Since 2014, we have seen incredible changes in this country and its role in the world. The promises that were made have been kept and we are now chasing new dreams and goals and ambitions. So that is the story of Bharat Reloaded. And this particular episode is focused on India's journey in the world, our foreign policy, the major accomplishments of the last 12 years and where we are headed in a rather turbulent and choppy world. It's a great honor for us at the National Broadcaster to be hosting none other than India's External Affairs Minister Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar for this discussion. Dr. Jaishankar is a very well known personality, but I will still do the honors a little bit by mentioning the fact that he has seen and steered India's foreign policy for a long time. He was a Foreign Secretary of India, which is the highest position in the Indian Foreign Service system. He was our ambassador to United States and China. And after retirement from the diplomatic service, he has been External Affairs Minister since 2019. So it's a great privilege, sir, as always, to host you on the National Broadcaster.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, Sriram, with you.
Dr. Jaishankar, when we look back at these 12 years, I mean, the question naturally, starts forming in the mind as to what is the impact of leadership, because the Prime Minister has had this enormous influence on so many matters. But if you look at India as a nation, as a society, as a people, and of course as a state, which you are part of, the real query for the viewers will be, what is the Modi effect on all these big phenomena that we need to look at in retrospect, because it's 12 years.
Well, that's actually a very big question. It's a very big question because I think in these 12 years, if you see pretty much every domain has in some form or the other has been actually changed, in many cases undergone a very major transformation. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. One, I think Prime Minister Modi is very much a person of these times, that India actually threw up a leader like him who was in tune with its aspirations and with its expectations, with the thinking of the people, with the popular sentiment. But there is the other way, which is that he also has shaped it, he has steered it, he has led it. And I obviously am concentrated, focused on the foreign policy aspect of it. But there are other aspects. I mean, if you look for example, at the digitalization of India. I mean, for most people in the world, I can tell you that is probably what fascinates them the most. How digital today we have become, how much we have embraced this technology, where even many more developed countries have been much more conservative in this regard. The other, in a way, is the spirit of India, the confidence, the sort of can-do spirit, when you go to you have a Gaganyaan, I mean, it can be reflected in achievements of various kinds, but overall, as you can see, it's a much more in a way fired up country. And the third, I would say, is really that pride in our civilization and heritage and tradition, who we are, who we really are. And that's particularly important at this time, because it's a moment when we are going up in the world hierarchy, and it's very important for a country going up that you should have a good sense of yourself, and I think that has really changed in this last decade. So when I therefore in a way respond to your question, to me there are actually achievements and practices and attitudes which have changed. There is a overall energy and enthusiasm and spirit in the country which has changed, and there is our own identity and our sense of self which has changed. I think Prime Minister Modi, more than anybody else, captures it, he leads it, in many ways he is also shaped by it.
That's a powerful combination. Viewers, Dr. Jaishankar is talking about India has become Bharat. Do read his 2 books in succession, India Way and then Why Bharat Matters. This is especially true with regard to the point about India's identity and how it's necessary for its rise. Sir, coming to foreign policy, 12 years, 10th of June, Prime Minister is going to complete 4,399 consecutive days as elected Prime Minister. Overtaking Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who had done 4,398 days. So obviously this is an era, sir. I mean, there's just no 2 opinions about this. Is a Narendra Modi era. So when you have served under multiple prime ministers in your long career. So there is, most of us who study foreign policy say there was a Nehruvian era and there was an Indira Gandhi era, and now there is a Narendra Modi era. So if you were to take a big picture view to start with, what is different about this era in terms of our approach, our way of looking at the world and the way we have acted in the world?
I think first of all our interests are much bigger and much more spread out than the earlier eras. So when your interests are much deeper, then naturally our engagement, our behavior, our attitude reflects that. I'll give you an example. Let's take what is currently happening in the Gulf. Okay. So you have essentially 4 parties. I'm simplifying it a bit. So there is the US, there is Iran, there is Israel, and there is, for the sake of the argument, putting the Gulf together as a single party, though they are different. Now just look at it from our point of view today as opposed to how we may have approached it hypothetically before. Okay. Today we have very, very deep interest with all these 4 parties, and I will actually start from where we have the deepest interest, which is the Gulf. When you have 10 million of our citizens living there, when it is so close to you, so connected to you, when it is your primary source of energy, when it is one of your key trade partners, then obviously your stakes are tremendous. So when we approach a complex situation like the conflict which happened after 28th of February, this is not a kind of a diplomatic conference to where you come there and you take positions by splitting the difference or say, well, the way to reconcile it is this. You have actually sharp, practical, deep stakes with each of these Gulf countries. At the same time, you also have a relationship with Iran. That Iran was a significant energy partner till their sanctions prevented them from remaining in the market in an effective way. It is a country where we have a significant intersection of interests, which we have demonstrated elsewhere. So you also want to safeguard that, and then there is the United States. I don't have to tell you, what is the importance of that relationship. And then there is Israel, which has actually been a very strong security partner, technology partner in very critical areas, which has stood by us at very important times. So what happens today is, when people compare today's era 2026 with the 1950s or 60s, I think they are basically missing the point. In the 50s and 60s, you didn't have this kind of major stakes in each of these accounts. So I have to today deal with this issue. I as India, as Bharat, keeping in mind each one of these relationships. Obviously there is a prioritization, because the 4 accounts are not necessarily equal. So what has happened is, now I can give you a very similar analogy for Ukraine. You have Russia, time tested partner, etc., but we also had a relationship with Ukraine, and then there is Europe, which is heavily invested in Ukraine, and then there is the United States, which at one point was pretty much identical with Europe, but that is no longer so. So when you have these situations where you have multiple parties, or even if there are two parties, but you have stakes in both or stakes in 3 or 4 or whatever it is, how to navigate this, how to get the best for yourself and for the world in this, that is a very different situation. Now, there will be countries where the stakes are less, there will be countries, for example, for whom whether Straits of Hormuz is open or not does not matter, or whether somebody charges for it or not is irrelevant. There will be countries who may be agnostic about nuclear proliferation. There would be countries who may not, with these 4 parties, have relationship with all of them. May have, in fact, we are one of the few, by the way, who have good relations with all 4.
All 4 are strategic partners.
So, I would say today the difference is that the times have changed, India's interests have changed. So, India's approach has changed. Second, India's capabilities have changed. So, in many ways the world looks to us for many things. If there is a natural disaster in this whole region, people look to India as a first responder. If there is even a big economic crisis of the kind which happened in Sri Lanka, a neighbor says, look, I am in very deep economic distress, IMF is not responding fast enough, so you are my neighbor, stand by me. So, I would say I would say in terms of capability, a very good example was COVID, where large parts of the global south basically told us, saying, look, left to the way things are, we will never get our vaccines, or we will get it so late that it will be disastrous. So, please, you are a big vaccine producer, please step forward. So, I would say our interests have changed, our capabilities have changed, and in many ways, because going back to your first question about leadership, I think our clarity has changed, that today we look at the world, we have a very clear sense neighbors are our first priority, that is why we have neighborhood first. Then we go beyond the neighborhood into the maritime domain. So, we have Sagar, Mahasagar policy. So, we have prioritized many of these accounts, Mauritius, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, Maldives, which were not there before. And if you look at then beyond the extended neighborhood, the Gulf, ASEAN, Central Asia, and we have at the highest level actually engaged all the major players, trying to get an optimum positioning and making sure that Bharat's interests are always, that is the lens through which we approach. We believe that the good of the world and the good of India are not contradictory. I do not have to be selfish, I know how to reconcile it. So, I would say that is the real change of era, which is I am going in there now with capabilities, I am going in there with interests. That was not the case before.
You already mentioned the disruptions in the due to the Iran war, and last year PM's third term actually has been very challenging on that account because of all the escalating armed conflicts and the disruptions to supply chains, threats to our energy security, especially food, fertilizer, our farmers' interests, all those were at stake. Now, how has Modi government approached these very, very turbulent times, and what has essentially, you already mentioned the sense of national interest, but it will be helpful for our viewers if you talk a little bit about our tactics and strategies in handling these crises, because of course, you said we have friendships with all major players and we have delicately done the balancing act, but beyond that, how have we ensured the tankers have come through the choke points? How have we ensured the the fuel at the pump remains at reasonably priced, and how have we done this kind of a Goldilocks approach where we have managed to not antagonize any side? I mean, this I think is more than a tightrope. I think many people see it as a miracle. So, how did we do this, sir, and what is the core approach or method we used?
Look, before we get there, I want to make a relevant point, but a slightly different point. You know, if I had told someone 15 years ago that my diplomacy at some point would be focused on ensuring fertilizers, they would be wondering what am I talking about. Or if I told them, you know, I will have to, you know, do everything I can, strain every muscle, put in every effort to look after my pharmaceutical industry. Okay. I think a generation ago people would not have understood it. And what has changed, before I come to your point, how do you navigate these choppy waters? It is actually what has changed in India, what has changed in the government, what has changed in the society, which is when we think of our national security. National security is not just about protecting the borders or doing internal security. Today, economic security, energy security, fertilizer security, health security, cyber security, I can just make a long list. Okay. And what has happened is, because you have a strong prime minister, a very integrated way of, you know, the manner in which the government works, which is really in a sense it's sort of everybody,
whole of nation, whole of
yes,
government.
so kind of whole of the government, whole of the nation as well. So what happens is, you do not say, well, that is some other department's problem. Okay. If we have, you know, after 28th of February, for example, if there is a big concern about cooking gas, if there is a big concern about fuel, which there was,
yes,
every part of the government which is relevant to the problem immediately is pulled in. Okay. So what has happened in many ways is, our way of working, the tasks we set for ourselves, you know, I mean, right now, for example, last 3 months, you know, the amount of time we have spent engaging countries who are oil providers, gas providers, within that LNG, LPG, fertilizer manufacturers, traders, because this is a national priority. So the foreign policy has been continuously, in a sense, you know, brought or is in sync with what are actually the prime national goals of the moment. And when I go around the world, when I meet many of my counterparts, when I often read about other countries, I must say, I mean, when I see the kind of problems that many countries are going through in terms of their energy access, and I mean, leave alone cost. Okay, I mean, almost everywhere in the world, energy costs have just
zoomed up,
you know, gone sky high. Even access, even availability. When you look at countries who are struggling, especially fertilizer is a very big worry for a lot, yes, for a lot of countries. Or in fact, again my mind goes back to COVID, that, you know, one part of it was, you know, to make the vaccines, but you got to understand there was a back end, the back end where actually there had to be a flow of ingredients which were coming from about 25, maybe about 40 countries, which were necessary for the vaccines to be made in India, because not everything was made out here. So how do you keep the supply chain going? So today, you know, as we look at a lot of these issues, I think a big challenge for diplomacy, to which I believe we have responded well in the last 12 years, is how do you raise your game, how do you have the relationships, because you can't at the moment of crisis go to a government or a you know, a decision maker you have never met before and say, you know, guess what,
establish the relationship
right away. So this is something which has to pre-exist. Okay. So how do you have the relationships in place, how do you have the interests in place, how do you you know, often I mean there already is a pre-existing chain which is working. I think these are really issues that we need to look at, and in fact even in this period, the number of countries from where we are sourcing energy, where we are sourcing fertilizers has increased.
Last we heard was 41 or more countries.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this is testimony today to, in a way, to how deeply foreign policy and diplomacy have got integrated with other priorities of the government centering around, I would say, our societal security, our national development, our growth. It's not just in the time of challenges. I mean, even in non-stressful times. I mean, often if you look today at the tasking that we do, it's also in a diplomacy is tasked with, let us say, spotting opportunities, looking at things to do. So maintaining this balance, I mean, I still think I would prefer to use the word tightrope, that walking the tightrope, managing people, and the Gulf is a good example. In the Gulf, trying to get our ships, the tankers, out of the Gulf, getting our people, many of them who were stuck in Iran, but also in the Gulf. So how do we manage 4 very complex accounts, each one, when obviously they are at very adversarial situation vis-a-vis with each other. These are really today the new realities, the realities for which Indian diplomacy has had to get ready. And I think again I come back to it, a lot of this happens because you get the leadership, you get, because remember in these sort of situations often you have got to take a call on the, I mean you can't deliberate for too long, you can't be indecisive. You need and there is also, in a way, I would say, in all honesty, there is a certain brand India, and that brand India, at least in the last decade, to a great deal has been shaped by brand Modi as well. That the respect for the Prime Minister has also shaped attitude towards us. So when we try to do something, that is a asset that we have.
Right. Viewers, diplomacy is like gardening. It's a patient act that you have to keep on watering, and ultimately it yields fruit. And what External Affairs Minister is saying is that because we have done the spade work for so long, we have been able to survive the storms. Dr. Jaishankar, moving to the big powers now, everybody says this is the era of the very, very intense geopolitical rivalries and frictions. But there are also major changes in their approaches we have seen the last couple of years especially. So if you look at China and the US, I mean and India, Bharat as a kind of part of like a triangle, there have been some recalibrations. Most of us have a sense that relatively speaking our ties with China have improved over the last year, and relatively speaking our ties have worsened with the US over the last 1 year. So are we optimally, you already spoke about optimal positioning, but when it comes to the big players, would you say we have just got it right, or is it a still work in progress?
Look, the world is obviously changing, that has always been so. What is different is that the pace of change is quickening. Yes, I would say a big part of diplomacy today is how do you have an optimal positioning in the major among the major powers, and which is clearly a very complex, not a easy thing to do. Now again, as I said, even in a regional situation, all relationships are not the same. It is not a question of, oh, I will take a position somewhere in the middle between the two, because between the two your level of your quality of a relationship may be very different. One say one may be closer to you, one you may have more problems with bilaterally, one you may not, and sometimes it is not 2, it is 3 or 4 or 5. Okay. So, this search for the best positioning is always work in progress, because the world is changing, they are changing, you are changing. So, there is never a, I mean, I can never say, oh, we have arrived, or this is the perfect position. But I think in the last decade we have striven very hard to get to what can be the best possible positioning. Now, in this, some relationships have been more stable, some less so. You raised in particular two relationships, one US and China, but I think if one has to have really a considered answer, you have to also take into account Russia, Europe, to some extent Japan,
other power centers,
yeah, other powers, because it is not just these two. I think in the you have to look at maybe 5, 6, 7 powers right at the top. In the case of the United States, I mean, clearly after President Trump was elected, especially in the second term, the US is changed its terms of engagement with the world in a variety of ways. We are not affected by many of them directly, because we are not a member of NATO, of a military alliance with the United States. So, countries in Europe or some other allies probably feel the change much more than we do. But there would be aspects where everybody is affected. Everybody was affected, for example, by tariffs, by market access issues into the United States. Everybody is affected by certain positions and postures which the United States takes in its approach, maybe to multilateral organizations, maybe to regional issues. So, and the United States today very openly says that, look, we follow an America first policy. Now, I think from our side, quite independently of what the US does, I think we should always be clear that we follow an India first policy. To me, the test of any decision would be eventually what should be our national interest. What do we stand to gain? We can do the world good, but even while doing the world good, there must be something we stand to gain. It cannot be, it cannot be totally altruistic. Now, and you must not get confused here by misplaced ideological factors, and I will give you an example. In the 1950s, Indian diplomacy spent a lot of its political capital advocating China's entry in the United Nations. Now, in the process we actually alienated some countries, especially the United States. Now, the point I put to you is, I am still baffled why we made that a cause on which we spent political capital, when actually our national interest, there was no gain to the people of India.
They were not advocating for us to get any seat.
So I mentioned that to you because when we get into is there clarity today versus how was it before, I think today the leadership has clarity. I think the country has clarity. We have much sharper defined sense of national interest. Again I put it to you, we are not saying it's about me and me only. We think doing what is best for India, Bharat, and what is doing good for the world are eminently reconcilable. But you need to have that clarity. We should not be clouded by some ideological consideration, as we were in the 1950s. Where China is concerned, yes, we went through a difficult period, starting with 2020, when peace and tranquility in the border areas was disturbed. But in the last year, I think things have settled down. Things have settled down politically between us to a considerable degree. It is not, I would not say it has gone back to where it was. Comparatively, I would say the Russia relationship has remained steady, even as Russia's relationship with other countries have undergone a big change. I would say Japan is an example again of a very steady relationship. With Europe, it has actually gone up a lot this year. I mean, if you ask me what has been this year the most notable in all our diplomatic accounts, where has been the biggest improvement? I would say without question it is in Europe. That the FTA, the strategic relationship, partnership that we have, these have really created today a new much closer template for cooperation. At the same time, we look at the neighborhood. That too is changing. They have their own politics. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Usually people talk more about it when things are problematic. When situations improve, that doesn't always make the news. But I would say, diplomacy is about anticipating it, planning for it to the best you can, reacting to it the best you can. And I do believe that in the last decade we have done a reasonable job at the minimum in that regard.
Sir, you already mentioned other partnerships. Now the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, gave a speech at the World Economic Forum, and that was very widely commented upon, where he talked about rules based order collapsing, liberal international order is over, and so he said the middle powers, if we don't come and act together, we are not going to be at the table, but we will be on the menu. And that was a very catchy way of putting it. So what he was essentially saying is these second tier nations, middle powers, I mean, people talk about emerging powers. India, in my own view, is it's a rising power and it's much above a middle power, but still the idea is that these groups, these countries must group together in these times when the big shots are behaving erratically or against the rules. How much of it are you seeing it in practice in our foreign policy?
Well, there was a particular context to what Prime Minister Carney was saying, and he was primarily addressing Europe and NATO and American allies. So when he was talking about the rules based order ending, about the lack of reliability, etc., it was their predicament that he was articulating. It was certainly a very interesting speech, but from our perspective I do not think we should take it literally, and there is a reason. You use the word middle power. Now this has been a subject of discussion even among foreign ministers, and one of them actually commented with respect to India, saying you are not a middle power, you are a power in the middle. Okay.
In terms of positioning,
So the point is, I think middle powers, look, there are a category of powers who will remain pretty much in that bandwidth, because that is their capability. Structurally, they will not fall below this, they will not rise above that. I do not think we are in that category. We are a nation which is destined to go much higher in the international hierarchy. So I would say yes, it's a convenient term, but I would use it with a certain degree of caution here. There will be some I would say affinity of interests, some coming together between many such countries, because remember, many of these countries, particularly the Western countries, they had actually entirely put their security sort of calculations in the American basket, and today they are revisiting that. So they are today much more open. A lot of things that we used to say, I think today make much greater sense to them. Multi-alignment
is now universally accepted.
Yes. So what has happened is, I mean, strategic autonomy. So when now a country like India, look, we never, we have always plugged an independent line. We have always said, okay, we will have relationships where it suits our national interests, but at the end of the day, that decision making power fundamentally remains with us. We have not pledged ourselves in a way to another collection of countries when it comes to our core decision making. So I think I would say a lot of what we take for given and granted in this country today is being rediscovered by the rest of the world. That many countries that way are looking at us and saying, okay, that is how India does it. So, if I were to say recap my experiences of the last few months, I think two impressions are strong in my mind from my own colleagues, from foreign ministers of different countries. One, that in very complex situations you are able to handle all the parties and take care of your interests. Okay. And the Gulf, Ukraine are the two notable examples. The other is you have the ability to stand up for your interests, that to articulate it, to protect it, to pursue it. This is today the impression of India, the impression of Modi's India in the world. And I watch obviously the debate which Prime Minister Carney has initiated with a great deal of interest. I see opportunities there for us to forge more relationships, including, by the way, with Canada.
Of course, yeah, that's one of the big
upswings. Canada itself is today looking.
Around,
yes, I mean, you can see the change in the relationship after Prime Minister Carney took over. To me, yes, more possibilities, more opportunities, and I am glad, by the way, many of you are thinking along lines which I have long thought.
Right. Dr. Jaishankar, you already mentioned a neighborhood. Let's come there now and dwell a little bit upon the extreme disturbed condition we have seen since, especially since 2020 or so, but even more so last couple of years in Prime Minister's third term. There have been so many regime collapses and changes, and new political forces and players have come to the fore, and so the one side of the argument is that India has done the right thing, exercised strategic restraint, and has not interfered in whatever is happening and let the things play out and settle, especially with Bangladesh, for example. That's the argument. On the other hand, there are some who are saying we should have been much more interventionist and should have done more to secure our interests when the trends in South Asia were going against our interests. So, how would you put the internal debate, and how have we come out with an approach to neighborhood? We have neighborhood first, but what if the neighborhood itself is in flames, and should we go out with a firefighting hose in hand, or should we simply say it's their matter and they settle it and India will be there to help with their long-term development? I mean, could you just play out this argument and how we have approached neighborhoods, especially when they are undergoing so much turmoil?
Well, look, our neighborhood, each one of our neighborhood countries also has their own politics. Okay. It cannot be a foreign policy goal that your neighbor's politics is constantly and continuously and perpetually aligned with yours. They will have their ups and downs. Okay. But it is definitely strategic sense to plan for the possibility that there would be gaps, there would be lack of alignment or convergence, call it whatever you would. So, what is neighborhood first about? Neighborhood first is to invest resources and energy in our neighboring relationships, so that even when they have the ups and downs in the relationship, that argument that look, India is important, that relationship is important, we need to keep that in mind. That argument is strong enough to always be a significant factor, ideally a determining factor. Now, this is it looks very obvious when I say it, but look at the record, that was not the case. I mean, if you look through the 70s and 80s and 90s, I mean, in many cases, I mean, many people who today are giving advice about how to manage the neighborhood, look at the record of the past in many cases which are associated with them. You know, you had, I mean, you spoke about Bangladesh. I mean, bear in mind that Bangladesh actually at one point of time was harboring separatists and terrorists of various kinds, and was in a sense contributing to the instability of the entire northeast. Okay. Now, the fact is that got sorted out, and that got sorted out partly by creating the inducements to have a good relationship with India. I mean, we are looking at Sri Lanka. Take today's Sri Lanka, where India has an acceptance with every community in Sri Lanka, and compare it to the IPKF era. So, even I mean, look at Nepal, that instead of having a sentiment which somewhere sort of had a vested interest in positing India as a adversary or as a in less
Big
than
brother,
favorable
yeah,
terms.
they used to say,
Today you actually have had a visit recently by the RSP chairman Rabi Lamichhane, and you saw how that went. So, my point to you is there will be ups and downs, but that is in the nature of politics. Diplomacy is not about freezing advantageous situations and saying that will stay there forever. Diplomacy is about planning for those ups and downs and putting in place structures and relationships which do. Now, how does that work in real life? It works in real life because finally, I mean, just look at the last few months. Our neighbors turned to us saying, please assure us you will keep the electricity supply going. Now, if you did not even have an electricity supply, what assurance are you going to give them? Okay. Your neighbors are assured that you are keeping not only power going through the grids, but also diesel and petrol going through the pipelines. If you did not have that pipeline, now when did this pipeline come? When did those power grids come? They have all come in the last decade. Okay. You go to Sri Lanka. I mean, today I have lived in Sri Lanka. Okay. Today the popular perception of India, whether it was the economic crisis or what happened when cyclone Detwa hit them. I mean, we were there in that same day in Nepal. I mean, people remember that when the cyclone, when the earthquake hit them, we were there the first day. So, if you are there for your neighbors, you are there for your neighbors when COVID hits them, when there were fertilizer crisis, when there were power crisis, when they are short of fuel, many of them sometimes have food issues, whatever it is. That sense that look, a growing India, a rising India is to your advantage, that good relations with India are to your advantage. I think that is how, that is very, very critical, and where there are problems, you have to wait it out. It is not a question of strategic restraint, but diplomacy is not an impatient business, it is not a knee jerk response to what happens. Foreign policy has a certain calculation, it has a certain it needs preparation, it has a timeline, that is how it works. But we were always confident that look, even in Bangladesh it will settle down. It will settle down when the democratic process throws up voices of responsibility. And there has been a change of government in Sri Lanka as well. I mean, if you look, I mean, exactly the point you were making, you had very sharp changes in the regimes out there. But I put it to you that at the end of the day, our relationships by and large have actually weathered this. Now, there is the other side, which is we have one other neighbor, Pakistan, and there the response is very is this does not apply, because when somebody practices cross border terrorism as the central feature of the policy towards us, that you have to also ensure there are consequences, that it is not something which will be cost free. So, when you are comparing eras, I think the one thing this country is very clear on, nobody wants to see again what happened at 26/11. That 26/11 was cost free, that should never happen again.
That is a huge, the national security dimension of foreign policy is indeed massive. It is no longer a soft state, viewers, what External Affairs Minister is saying. and it's a great shift in India's strategic culture. Dr. Jaishankar, I want to just turn to the ministry for a while. Recently we had the Heads of Missions conference, and Prime Minister also addressed it, and there was a mention about the 3 T's, trade, technology and tourism, and you have also been emphasizing how to create a future ready diplomatic force for the country, and we are seeing higher intake of the Indian Foreign Service also, and we are all very happy in the strategic community believing that we are stepping up to the plate, but especially on these newer areas, cutting edge areas, the trainings also in the Sushma Swaraj Institute, which I am privy to, I have seen more emphasis on technology now, artificial intelligence and all these. So how fit for purpose is the Foreign Service today, and in the Modi era, in what way have we reformed their approach and their outlook, especially the newly recruited IFS officers, to be prepared for this kind of a world where you snap a finger and you hear that there's some new algorithm and new thing that has changed everything. So how are we able to keep up with these trends, and how are we maybe using these changes for our diplomatic advantage?
Well, I would say in the last decade the country has changed, government has changed. Clearly the Ministry of External Affairs and Foreign Service has also changed, and it's changed partly because the larger environment encourages that. So if you look at the tasking, as you said, you tell people saying, look, we want to see how do you contribute to trade, what are you doing in technology, how are you promoting tourism. So these are clearly targets, goals which are set so that they get the message and apply themselves accordingly. But what has also happened, I must tell you, is the intake of people, because whenever a new cohort joins, I make it a point to meet them, spend time with them. I am also seeing a change, and not just in the intake, even as people progress, even I would say people at the mid level today, that they are far more tech savvy, they are far more tuned into economic, commercial issues than perhaps 1 or 2 generations ago. And this messaging that look, we are all in it together, that diplomacy is not in its own world, that the task of diplomacy is to in a sense, in a very literal sense, to serve the people. That there is you are partly a public delivery service in some respects, that you have to contribute to the economic growth and progress. Often I have seen in many technology areas that it is the embassies and the colleagues in the ministry who have actually zoomed in on a particular issue or a particular problem or a particular opportunity, and often they take the initiative to go to another ministry and say, you really need to look at it. I mean, it would particularly apply when it comes to say semiconductors or AI, modern the currently the digital plus era, but not necessarily there in other areas as well. So I think the quality, the attributes which you look today for in an Indian diplomat are different than they were before, and that difference reflects the changes which have come about in the country, in the government, and a lot of it again goes back to that leadership, the motivation, the energy. I mean, we spoke about Prime Minister Modi as a leader. He is also a great communicator. So just following him, it gets people thinking. There is that desire to say, okay, if the head of the government is really pushing the envelope and taking the country, so what do I do on my part? I think that feeling is very much there.
Right, sir. Last but not least, you spoke about young Indian Foreign Service officers, but let us look at the bigger picture, which is young Indians, young Bharatiyas. So they, have been plugged into foreign policy, diplomacy much more. They have voted overwhelmingly for Bharatiya Janata Party and for Prime Minister for so many elections over and over again. The confidence, trust of young people is very much there with the government. But still, many of them ask, how can we be more involved in foreign policy or in international relations of our country? We saw that the way they were mobilized during the G20 presidency in 2023. How can we sustain that deep and increasing interest in geopolitics and foreign policy among young people? I must say millions and millions of young people look up to you especially, and the reason is because you directly connect with them and you engage with them in so many public gatherings across the country also. So it's about, you brought, in a way, I think Modi era, we brought the world to India, and of course we are taking India to the world. So please share your thoughts to inspire our young audiences, especially who are watching. How can they be more integrated into the overall effort of the nation's rise in on the world stage?
Well, I would say, in a way, the young people, they have the world in the palm of their hand, because that phone which they have tells them so much that it's really a few libraries of knowledge that they are carrying out there, and they get it in a way, in a far more digestible form than just how it would have been earlier. So the fact is, you are right, young people absolutely take much more interest in the world than would have been the case 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly 30 years ago. The second part of it is, it also matters to them. I mean, think to yourself, something happened in the Gulf, so your petrol price could go up. So something else happens in Russia, Ukraine, your cooking oil is jeopardized. So you actually have, I mean, COVID itself is an example. So what happens in the world is no longer stays in the world, it comes to your home. And this is what globalization is about. Okay. So globalization requires people to get interested in the world, because if there are forces and happenings which shape your well-being, you owe it to yourself to influence that. So what therefore we made a very conscious effort, as a government, even as a foreign ministry, to try to get more and more young people interested, and I must say they are responding very well, as you noted. But there are two additional points. One, we are, I think, seeing the emergence of a global workplace. That if I look even in the last year, countries where suddenly a few tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Indians have added to the work, to that particular country's workplace. And if you look at global demographics, it is something which is bound to happen, and my own sense is this era of greater technology will not do away with people. In fact, I think capable people, useful people, trained people would actually have a bigger opportunity. Okay. The second, flowing from the workplace, is also a workforce, that if you are an employer, let us say in Germany, or you are an employer, give me Japan, Korea, and you want to add to your workforce, where is that additional talent going to come from? Now, it does not. Now, I know there are a lot of other complex issues, sometimes politics, societal reactions, etc. We have seen some of that, including in the US, even in Europe to some degree. Often the work can travel, person does not always have to travel now. So, I would say it is important today young people take more interest. I am happy to see them taking more interest, because the world is an opportunity. The world is an opportunity, the world thinks well of India. We are today, we have a brand today. When I go out, we are a country which is welcomed. And I think there we have today created a pathway for young people to utilize, maybe abroad, but equally at home. I see as you say, we are getting ready for the world, but the world is also getting ready for us, and I predict a much bigger global presence in India, economically and in terms of the workplace,
which will create so many more opportunities for our burgeoning youth demographic. Viewers, fascinating conversation with Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister. For me, the main takeaway is the way he explained the nuances of what is diplomacy all about, what is the art of foreign policy, and how in the 12 years of the Narendra Modi government, we have tried to maximize the advantages and the gains for India's core national interests. It is India first foreign policy end of the day, as Honorable Minister told us, and people of India will continue to support this movement because they sense this upward rise that Dr. Jaishankar was talking about, and they feel they are part of this elevating phenomenon, and they feel their stature, their interest, and of course the opportunities, concrete economic opportunities for our people are also growing as a result of the foreign policy. We want to thank Honorable Minister for giving us time as always, and sir, as always I'll end by simply saying, Bharat has been reloaded, and we believe Prime Minister, yourself, you've played very important roles in this, and this is the era of transformative change, and people are going to continue to support your endeavors as you navigate the ship of the state through difficult times in the world. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great pleasure.
Viewers, that's all in this special episode of Indian Diplomacy under the series of Bharat Reloaded. Do think about what Dr. Jaishankar told you. There's so many pieces of wisdom there, and do replay and keep watching this show, because I think it will be essential learning going forward. If you got this keen interest in international affairs, this show I think is going to be a benchmark. Thank you for watching. Let's keep thinking about the world and supporting India, Bharat, as it rises further in the Narendra Modi era. Thank you for watching. Take care.